There are moments in life that don't arrive loudly. They don't announce themselves with clarity or warning. They creep in quietly, disguised as confusion, pressure, or a feeling you can't quite explain. And right now, you might be in one of those moments. A serious situation, not necessarily visible to the world, but heavy enough that you feel it in your chest, in your thoughts, in the silence when everything else fades away. And the truth is, this moment may not be here to break you. It may be here because something within you is trying to change. Because not every difficult situation is meant to destroy you. Some are meant to wake you up. You might have started noticing it already. The way certain conversations feel different now. The way places that once felt comfortable now feel distant. The way you can't pretend anymore. Can't ignore certain thoughts. Can't go back to who you used to be. And that's not weakness. That's awareness. That's growth trying to happen. But growth doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels like pressure, like confusion, like you're standing in the middle of your life, not knowing which direction is right anymore. And that uncertainty can feel heavy, because you're not just dealing with what's happening around you. You're dealing with what's changing inside you. There are questions forming in your mind that didn't exist before. Why do I feel this way? Why do I see things differently now? Why does what once felt right no longer feel aligned? And the more you try to ignore it, the louder it becomes. Not because something is wrong with you, but because something within you refuses to stay asleep. A serious situation isn't always about external chaos. Sometimes it's internal. A shift in your mindset, a deeper awareness of your life, a realization that you've outgrown certain patterns, people, or environments. And that realization can feel uncomfortable, because growth requires letting go. And letting go is never easy. You may feel misunderstood, like people around you don't see what you see, like they don't understand why you've changed, why you're quieter, why you think more, why you question things you used to accept without hesitation. But this isn't isolation. It's transition. You're not losing yourself. You're discovering parts of yourself that were always there, just waiting to be acknowledged. And in moments like this, help may be needed, but not always in the way you think. Sometimes help isn't about someone coming to save you. Sometimes it's about allowing yourself to pause, to reflect, to be honest with what you're feeling instead of running from it. It's about recognizing when you need support, whether that's talking to someone you trust, taking a step back, or simply giving yourself permission to process everything without judgment. Because ignoring it won't make it disappear, and rushing through it won't make it easier. This phase requires something different. It requires presence, patience, and courage. The courage to face yourself, to sit with the discomfort instead of escaping it, to admit that something is changing, even if you don't fully understand it yet. And here's what most people don't realize. Moments like this shape you. They redefine how you see the world. They build emotional strength that can't be taught. They force you to grow in ways comfort never could. Even when it feels overwhelming. Even when it feels uncertain. Something meaningful is happening within you. You're becoming more aware, more intentional, more real. And that process doesn't always look peaceful. Sometimes it looks like confusion, like distance, like questioning everything. But that doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're thinking. You're evolving. You're no longer moving through life on autopilot. So if you're in a serious situation right now, take a breath, slow down, You don't need to have all the answers today. You don't need to fix everything immediately. What matters is that you're aware, that you're paying attention, that you're willing to face what's real instead of avoiding it. Because that willingness, that quiet strength, is where real transformation begins. And maybe, just maybe, this moment isn't here to push you to your limit, but to show you who you're capable of becoming when things are uncertain. So don't run from it. Don't silence it. Listen, reflect, grow through it at your own pace. And if this message reached you at the right time, if something in you felt understood, then stay connected to this journey. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Return to Awakening. Because sometimes the guidance you need doesn't come as answers. It comes as reminders that you're not alone in what you're feeling, and that what you're going through has meaning. There are moments when everything around you looks normal, but inside you, something feels completely different. It's subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, a quiet shift in how you perceive your own life. The things you used to chase don't excite you the same way anymore. The conversations you once enjoyed feel shallow. The noise of the world feels louder, but less meaningful. And in that silence growing inside you, a strange awareness begins to rise. Not confusion alone, but clarity mixed with discomfort. You start observing yourself more than living on autopilot. You notice your reactions, your thoughts, your emotional patterns, and it feels like you're stepping outside of who you used to be while still living your same life. That experience can feel isolating because it's hard to explain something that is happening internally but has no visible shape outside. So you stay quiet. You observe. You think. You question. And this is where many people misunderstand their own process. They think something is wrong. They think they are falling behind or losing interest in life. But what is actually happening is more complex than that. You are becoming aware of the difference between who you were conditioned to be and who you are beginning to become. There is a serious inner tension that can appear during this phase. One part of you wants familiarity, comfort, routine, old habits, old versions of connection. But another part of you refuses to stay the same. It resists returning to ignorance. It resists repeating patterns that no longer feel aligned. And this internal conflict creates pressure. Not visible pressure, but emotional pressure that builds in silence. You may find yourself withdrawing, not because you hate people, but because your energy is shifting. You may find yourself overthinking simple situations, not because you are broken, but because your awareness is expanding faster than your external life is changing. And that mismatch creates discomfort, a feeling that something is off, even when nothing is technically wrong. This is often the point where people feel like they need help. But it's important to understand what kind of help is truly needed in moments like this. Sometimes it is guidance. Sometimes it is grounding. Sometimes it is simply being heard without judgment. And sometimes it is learning how to sit with yourself without trying to escape your own thoughts. Because what feels like instability is often transition, and transition always feels uncertain while it is happening. You might also notice something else. Old distractions lose their power. Things that once pulled your attention easily now feel empty. Even temporary escapes don't satisfy the same way anymore. And instead of feeling entertained, you feel observant, aware, almost detached from what used to fully occupy your mind. This is not detachment from life itself. It is detachment from illusion, from habits that no longer reflect who you are becoming. And that realization can feel both freeing and unsettling at the same time. Because when the old ways stop working, you are forced to face yourself more directly. No distractions, no avoidance, just you and your thoughts. And in that space, something very important begins to form. Honesty, not the kind you show others, but the kind you finally show yourself. About what you feel, what you need, what you can no longer ignore, and what you are no longer willing to repeat. But this honesty doesn't come gently at first. It arrives in waves. Some days you feel clear. Some days you feel lost. Some days you feel strong. And some days you feel uncertain again. And that fluctuation can make you question your own progress. But progress in inner transformation is never linear. It moves in layers, not straight lines. What matters is not that you feel stable every moment, but that you keep noticing what is changing inside you. Because awareness itself is already a form of growth, and many people never reach even that stage. So if you are here, in this state of questioning, observing, and feeling deeply different from your past self, understand that this is not random. It is not meaningless, and it is not something to fear. It is a phase where your inner world is reorganizing itself quietly, even if your outer world hasn't caught up yet. And in this phase, one of the most important things you may need is not answers, but patience with your own process. Because when your inner world starts changing, your mind naturally tries to rush clarity. It wants everything to make sense immediately. It wants certainty. It wants a fixed direction. But inner transformation doesn't obey urgency. It unfolds slowly, layer by layer, moment by moment. There may be days when you feel like you understand everything about yourself. And then the very next day, you feel like you understand nothing at all. That shift can feel frustrating, even discouraging, but it is part of the recalibration. Your thoughts are adjusting to a new level of awareness. Your emotions are learning how to respond differently. Your perception is expanding beyond old limits. And during this expansion, old identities begin to loosen. The version of you that used to react quickly. The version of you that used to accept everything without question. The version of you that used to stay silent even when something felt wrong. That version starts to fade. Not all at once, but gradually, subtly, until one day you realize you no longer fully fit into who you used to be. This can create an emotional gap, a space between your past self and your current awareness. And in that space, you may feel unsettled, like you are in between two versions of your own life, not fully who you were, and not yet fully who you are becoming. This in-between stage is where most of the serious inner confusion happens, because the mind tries to label it immediately. It tries to categorize it. It tries to return to something familiar. But there is nothing to return to in the same way anymore. Something has already shifted. And this is where many people silently struggle. They think they need to fix themselves, when in reality, nothing is broken. They think they need to escape the feeling, when in reality, the feeling is information. It is showing them where growth is taking place. Even the discomfort has meaning, because discomfort often appears when your inner truth is no longer aligned with your outer habits. And instead of seeing it as a crisis, it can also be seen as communication, a signal that something inside you is asking for attention. Not punishment, not fear, but awareness. You may also notice that your sensitivity increases during this phase. You feel things more deeply. You observe more carefully. You react less impulsively, but process more internally. And that can feel intense, because you are no longer numbing yourself to experiences in the same way. You are experiencing them more fully, more consciously. This heightened awareness is often misunderstood as emotional instability, but in reality, it is emotional refinement. You are becoming more selective with your energy, more conscious of what you allow into your mind, more aware of what drains you and what strengthens you. And while this brings clarity over time, at the beginning, it can feel like overload. Too much thinking, too many realizations, too much inner noise that has finally become audible. But even that noise has a purpose, because it shows you what was always there, but previously ignored. And now that it is visible, you have the chance to understand it instead of suppress it. So if you are in this stage where everything feels like it is shifting internally, where your thoughts feel deeper than usual, where your emotions feel more layered than before, pause for a moment and recognize something very important. You are not collapsing. You are becoming aware, and awareness, even when it feels overwhelming, is never the enemy. It is the beginning of clarity. But clarity often arrives in a way that feels disruptive first, because it doesn't ask permission to change your perception. It simply shows you what you could not fully see before. And once you see something differently, you cannot fully unsee it again. This is why certain phases in life feel serious. Not because something external is necessarily happening, but because your internal interpretation of life itself is shifting. You begin questioning things you once accepted without effort. You begin feeling distance from things you once relied on for comfort. And you begin noticing patterns you were previously unaware of. That kind of awareness can feel like a burden at first, because it removes the simplicity you used to have. But at the same time, it gives you depth. And depth changes how you experience everything. You might find yourself sitting in silence more often, not because you are lost, but because your mind is processing layers of understanding that words cannot fully capture. In those silent moments, something subtle happens. You start noticing your own presence, your own thoughts observing themselves, your own emotions unfolding without interruption. And this is where real internal change becomes undeniable, because you are no longer only reacting to life. You are observing yourself while living it. That observation creates distance between impulse and response, between emotion and action, between thought and identity. And in that space, something powerful begins to develop. Self-awareness that is not reactive but conscious. However, this stage can also feel emotionally heavy, because when you become more aware, you also become more aware of what no longer aligns. Old environments may feel too loud. Old habits may feel too repetitive. Old versions of yourself may feel unfamiliar in hindsight. And you start realizing that growth is not just about gaining, but also about releasing. Releasing comfort that no longer serves you. Releasing patterns that once protected you but now limit you. Releasing identities that were built in different seasons of your life. And letting go is rarely comfortable, even when it is necessary, even when it is right. This is why support becomes important in subtle ways during this phase. Not necessarily someone to fix your life, but someone or something that helps you stay grounded while you process change. That might be reflection. That might be journaling your thoughts. That might be quiet honesty with yourself. Or simply allowing yourself to slow down instead of forcing clarity. Because forcing clarity often creates more confusion. But allowing clarity creates understanding over time. And even if everything feels uncertain right now, there is still something stable underneath all of it. Your ability to notice what is changing. Your ability to reflect on your experience. Your ability to question instead of blindly continuing. That ability itself is powerful, because not everyone reaches this stage of awareness. Many people stay in repetition without ever pausing to observe it. But you are observing. You are questioning. You are feeling the shift instead of ignoring it. And that alone shows that something important is unfolding internally, even if you don't yet have the full picture of what it means. And when you reach this point of awareness, something very subtle begins to change in how you relate to your own life. You stop moving only on impulse. You start pausing more often before reacting. You begin noticing the space between what happens to you and how you choose to respond to it. And that space, even if it feels small at first, is where transformation quietly lives. Because most people don't realize, change doesn't always begin with action. Sometimes it begins with observation, with noticing, with becoming honest enough to see what is actually happening inside your own mind. And in a serious inner phase like this, observation becomes your anchor. Even when emotions rise and fall, even when thoughts feel unclear, even when you don't fully understand what direction your life is taking, there is still one thing you can return to: your awareness of the present moment, not the past version of you that is no longer here, not the imagined future that feels uncertain, but the simple reality of what you are experiencing right now. And when you stay with that present awareness, something begins to soften. The pressure to figure everything out slowly reduces, because you start realizing that not everything needs to be solved immediately. Some things just need to be understood gradually. You may also begin to see how much of your inner struggle is connected to resistance. Resistance to change, resistance to uncertainty, resistance to not having full control over what is happening inside you. But change is not something that waits for permission. It unfolds whether you are ready or not. The only choice you truly have is how you meet it, with resistance or with awareness. And when you choose awareness, even imperfectly, even inconsistently, you begin to experience moments of clarity in between the confusion. Small moments, quiet moments, but real moments of understanding. You might suddenly realize why certain things no longer feel right, or why certain situations feel emotionally distant, or why your mind keeps returning to deeper questions about your life, your purpose, or your direction. These realizations don't always come in a dramatic way. Often they come softly, like a whisper in your thoughts, a feeling that something has changed and cannot be ignored anymore. And even though that realization can feel heavy, it is also honest. And honesty, even when uncomfortable, is a form of liberation. Because what becomes clear over time is this: you are not meant to stay the same version of yourself forever. You are meant to evolve through what you experience, to refine your understanding of yourself and the world around you. But evolution is not always smooth. It comes with phases of discomfort, phases of questioning, phases where you feel like you are standing between two different versions of your life. And in that space between who you were and who you are becoming, there is often silence, confusion, and reflection that feels deeper than usual. But that space is not empty. It is active. Something is forming there, even if you cannot fully see it yet. A new way of thinking, a new level of self-awareness, a new understanding of what truly matters to you. And although it may feel like things are falling apart internally, in many cases, what is actually happening is rearrangement. a shift in how you perceive yourself and your life experience. So instead of rushing to escape this phase, you can begin to meet it with curiosity, with patience, with the willingness to understand rather than judge it too quickly. Because what you are going through right now is not meaningless. It is not random. It is not without direction. It is a process of becoming more aware of your own inner world in ways you may not have experienced before. And in this deeper level of awareness, something very important begins to reveal itself slowly. You start noticing that not every thought you have is actually you. Not every emotion defines who you are. Not every fear is a message you need to obey. There is a separation forming inside your perception between the observer and what is being observed. And this realization, even if subtle, changes everything. Because for a long time, many people live completely identified with their thoughts. If they think something, they believe it. If they feel something, they become it. If fear arises, they assume it is truth. If confusion appears, they assume they are lost. But in this phase you are going through, something different starts to happen. You begin to notice thoughts as events, not identities. You begin to see emotions as waves, not definitions of who you are. And that creates a quiet but powerful shift in your inner stability. Even in emotional turbulence, there is now a part of you that is watching, not reacting immediately, not fully merging, but observing. And that observation creates space. Space between experience and identity. Space between what is temporary and what is stable within you. But this awareness also brings responsibility. Because once you start seeing more clearly, you can no longer ignore certain truths about your habits, your environment, and your inner dialogue. You may notice how often you speak to yourself in ways you would never speak to someone else. You may notice how quickly you assume worst-case scenarios. You may notice how easily your mind creates pressure out of uncertainty. And instead of judging yourself for it, this stage invites understanding. Because you are not discovering these patterns to punish yourself. You are discovering them so you can finally change your relationship with them. And change at this level is not about force. It is about awareness first, then gradual adjustment, then consistent self-alignment over time. You might also begin to feel moments where you question your direction in life more deeply than before. Not just what you are doing, but why you are doing it. Not just where you are going, but whether it still feels meaningful to you. And these questions are not a sign of failure. They are a sign of depth, a sign that your inner world is asking for authenticity, not repetition. Because when awareness increases, tolerance for emptiness decreases. You can no longer stay fully engaged in things that feel disconnected from your values or your growth. And this can create temporary discomfort in your daily life, because you are no longer fully aligned with your old patterns. But your new direction is still forming. That in-between stage can feel like instability, but it is actually transition in progress. And during this transition, you may notice something else. You become more sensitive to energy, tone, intention, and meaning in situations. Things that used to pass unnoticed now feel significant. Small interactions feel deeper. Silence feels louder. Your inner world becomes more active than your outer distractions. And while this can feel overwhelming at times, it is also a sign of increased awareness, a sharpening of perception that allows you to see life more clearly than before. But clarity does not always arrive as comfort. Sometimes it arrives as realization. And realization can temporarily unsettle what you thought was certain. Still, this is part of the process. Because without awareness, there is no real growth. And without reflection, there is no real transformation. So even in this serious internal phase, even in this uncertainty, something meaningful is taking shape quietly beneath everything you are experiencing. And one of the most important things you may begin to understand in this stage is that not everything in your life needs to move at the same speed. Your inner world may be evolving rapidly, while your external life still looks the same. And that difference can create frustration if you don't understand it, because the mind naturally wants alignment. It wants your feelings, thoughts, and reality to all match immediately. But transformation rarely works that way. It often begins internally long before anything changes externally. So you may feel like you are already different, but your surroundings haven't caught up yet. You may feel like your thinking has expanded, but your daily life still reflects older patterns. And that mismatch can feel like tension, but it is not a contradiction. It is a transition phase. And during this phase, patience becomes more than just a virtue. It becomes a necessity for stability. Because if you rush to force external changes before internal clarity is complete, you often end up repeating cycles in different forms. But if you allow yourself to grow internally first, then external changes become more natural, more aligned, and more stable over time. And this is where something very subtle but powerful begins to happen. You start trusting your awareness more than your impulses. Not perfectly, not all at once, but gradually. You begin to pause before reacting. You begin to reflect before deciding. You begin to question whether your actions are coming from fear, habit, or genuine alignment. And that pause creates a new level of control, not over life itself, but over your response to life. And that is where real inner strength begins. You may also start realizing that certain emotional triggers lose their intensity over time. Situations that once overwhelmed you may now feel more manageable. Not because life becomes easier, but because your understanding deepens. You are no longer interpreting everything through the same emotional lens you once had. And that shift changes how you experience almost everything. But even with this growth, there will still be moments of confusion. Moments where you feel like you are going backwards. Moments where old thoughts temporarily return. Moments where you question whether you are really changing at all. And this is where self-compassion becomes essential. Because growth is not a straight line upward. It moves in cycles, layers, and waves. What matters is not perfection in progress, but persistence in awareness. Even when clarity fades temporarily. Even when emotions feel heavy again. Even when uncertainty returns. You are still learning to see yourself differently. And that ability to return to awareness, even after confusion, is one of the strongest signs of inner development. Because it shows that your growth is not dependent on perfect conditions. It is becoming part of how you relate to your own mind and experience. And slowly, without force, this begins to reshape your identity from within. Not by rejecting who you were, but by expanding beyond it. And in that expansion, something very quiet but powerful continues to unfold beneath everything you are living through. And as this inner expansion continues, you may begin to notice something very subtle in the way you respond to your own thoughts. The thoughts are still there. The doubts are still there. The questions still arise. But your relationship with them is no longer the same. You are not immediately pulled into every thought like before. You are not fully absorbed by every emotion that appears. There is a growing distance, calm, quiet, and observational. And in that distance, something new becomes possible. Choice, not the kind of forced choice that comes from pressure, but the kind of conscious space where you can actually pause and decide how you want to respond internally. This is one of the most important turning points in inner awareness. Because for a long time, many people believe they are their thoughts. They believe every mental voice represents truth. They believe every emotional wave defines reality. But now something is shifting. You are beginning to see that your mind is not a fixed identity. It is a moving process. And you are not just inside that process. You are also the one noticing it. That realization, even if it feels small at first, begins to change the way you carry yourself in everyday life. You become less reactive, more reflective, more aware of patterns before they fully take control. But at the same time, this awareness can also bring moments of emotional exhaustion, because seeing more clearly also means noticing more deeply. And noticing more deeply can feel overwhelming when you are still adjusting. You may feel times where you want to return to simplicity, to stop thinking so much, to stop analyzing everything, to go back to a time when things felt easier. But what you are experiencing is not something you can truly go back from, because awareness, once expanded, does not fully shrink again. It only integrates. So instead of returning to ignorance, you begin learning how to live with awareness without letting it overwhelm you. And this balance takes time. It is not instant. It is not perfect. It is developed through experience. You may also begin to notice shifts in your emotional priorities. Things that once felt urgent no longer hold the same weight. Problems that once dominated your mind begin to feel more manageable with distance. And what once felt like identity-level stress starts to feel like passing experience. This does not mean your problems disappear. It means your relationship with them changes. And that change is subtle but powerful. Because when your perception shifts, your entire experience of life shifts with it. Even your understanding of help begins to evolve. You may realize that help is not always external intervention. Sometimes it is internal awareness. Sometimes it is emotional honesty. Sometimes it is simply giving yourself permission to slow down and not rush your healing process. Because healing in this sense is not linear repair. It is gradual alignment. It is returning again and again to awareness until it becomes more natural than confusion. And even though this process can feel serious, deep, and sometimes overwhelming, there is also something quietly stabilizing within it. A sense that you are no longer entirely lost inside your thoughts. A sense that you are beginning to understand how your inner world actually works. A sense that even in uncertainty, you are not completely disconnected from yourself anymore. And that recognition alone is a form of grounding that slowly strengthens over time.